Hey everybody, my name is Yahel, and today we're going to be taking a look at Rare. Now, Rare was the first developer that as a kid I can really remember getting into. Now, what really got this started for me was that in 1994, Nintendo Power sent out a promotional videotape to its subscribers for Donkey Kong Country. It was only 15 minutes long, but it took you behind the scenes of Nintendo, it took you behind the scenes of the game's development, and it showed you Donkey Kong Country game footage. So far, we had really only seen just pictures and magazines, and they look great, but seeing it in action was mind-blowing to me. You have to understand, in November of 94, Donkey Kong Country was released, and so was the 32X. And Donkey Kong Country looked way better than anything we had seen for the 32X so far. As far as I was concerned, the next generation console was already sitting in my living room, and it was a Super Nintendo. Now obviously, Rare has a history way before that, and way after that. So we're going to take a look at that here today in this video. This is the story of Rare. Although Rare was founded in 1985, its true beginning dates back to 1982 when brothers Tim and Chris Stamper decided that after spending years programming arcade games for others, it was time to work for themselves. The brothers wanted to create and perhaps more importantly own their own game properties. They founded Ashby Computers and Graphics Limited with the intention of producing games for the burgeoning home market. Their first game, Jetpac, was released in 1983 for their platform of choice, the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, an 8-bit personal computer. Rather than publish it under Ashby Computer Graphics Limited, the Stampers created yet another pseudonym, Ultimate Play the Game. Upon its release, Jetpac was critically acclaimed and went on to be released for various other computers. Over the next 2 years, Ultimate Play the Game became the UK's top developer. Ultimate's style and ability to consistently produce high-quality games earned the company a loyal and rabid fan base. The brothers rarely gave interviews and didn't attend tech conferences, both of which helped to create a mystique around the company. The brothers weren't just trying to avoid the media. Tim and Chris were known for working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. Frankly, they didn't have time to spend on interviews or conferences. They believed that a part-time employee resulted in a part-time game, and required that their employees totally commit their time to the company and its projects as well. The Stamper brothers truly led by example. In the 3 years that Ultimate Play the Game existed, the brothers only took time off on 2 days. Both were Christmas mornings. From 1982 to 1985, Ultimate Play the Game released a slew of games for the Spectrum, all of which were considered to be great commercial and critical successes. Their games didn't just sell well, they also innovated. Knightlore, for example, was the first isometric 3D game in history. There seemed to be no limit to the company's potential. Yet in 1985, much to the surprise of the UK gaming industry, the Stamper brothers sold Ultimate Play the Game to British game publisher US Gold. They abandoned the Spectrum platform altogether. You see, the year prior, Chris and Tim had gotten their first look at a little console from Japan you may have heard of, the Famicom. The brothers knew that the Famicom was the future and that the time to move on from the Spectrum had come. They formed a special division within Ashby Computers to reverse engineer the Famicom and its games. By the time US Gold purchased Ultimate Play the Game, they had already figured out how to develop for Nintendo's console, even though it wouldn't be released in the UK for another year. This special division was codenamed Rare. Nintendo had once claimed that it was impossible for the Famicom to be decoded or reverse engineered. Yet the Stamper brothers had done just that and flew to Kyoto, Japan to show Nintendo executive Minoru Arakawa several tech demos that they had prepared. Nintendo offered the Stamper brothers an unlimited budget for them to work on as many games for the Famicom as they wanted, which bypassed Nintendo's quality assurance limitations placed on other third-party developers. After they returned to England, Ashby Computers Limited moved their headquarters to Twycross and set up a new studio using the name of the subdivision, Rare. In England, the press and fans alike wondered what the Stamper brothers were thinking. The Spectrum ZX was still the dominant home computer in the UK, and outside of the occasional Donkey Kong arcade cabinet, Nintendo had zero penetration. Nintendo's unlimited budget allowed Rare to work on an extremely large amount of games, as well as work with an extremely large amount of publishers. Rare worked with companies like Trade West, Acclaim Entertainment, Electronic Arts, Sega, Mindscape, and GameTech. In contrast to their original vision of owning their own games and intellectual properties, Rare had begun making licensed games for the likes of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Hollywood Squares, and ports including Marble Madness, Narc, and Sid Meier's Pirates. While they did create and code some new in-house properties like Battletoads, less than half were original games. Many titles such as the Wizard and Warriors trilogy and a third Jetman game were outsourced to Zippo Games. A a studio they outsourced games to so frequently that they eventually bought them and renamed them Rare Manchester. Rare's mindset at the time was to create as many games as possible, leading to a decline in both quality and creativity. Aside from a few standouts, many of Rare's games during this time period were solid but unspectacular, especially when compared to their previous output. For Rare, the trade-off seemed worth it. The large number of games they produced and ported over gave them far more exposure than they would have gotten in England's smaller market.
Nintendo is something that started in Japan and has taken America by storm. In just 3 years, they've sold more than 11 million hardware units at about $100 each. They've got more gadgets, zappers, and gizmos than you can shake a joystick at, and about 80 different games you can buy to plug into the systems. So far, Nintendo has sold more than 50 million game cartridges. By the end of this year, they hope to have their system in 1 out of every 8 American homes. The game that comes with the hardware purchase is Super Mario Brothers. Mario and Luigi are Nintendo's superstar characters. In the games, they battle their way through a perilous maze of adventure and daring do. Out in the real world, their images adorn everything from sweatshirts to underwear.
By 1991, Nintendo had completely cornered the Japanese and North American market, and all of those easy-to-code games and ports that Rare worked on translated to easy money. During those first 5 years, Rare produced over 60 games for the NES and Game Boy, as well as a few Sega Genesis and Game Gear titles. That's more than one commercially released game each month. Thanks to their intimate knowledge of the NES's hardware, Rare was able to create games quickly and, on occasion, push the system further than many thought it could go.
It's just video game reviews!
Okay, last week Harley and I reviewed Ultra Enviroman. Whack to the curb. It has got to go. So today, we're gonna take a look at Battletoads. Rocket! That it is. I mean, they got Psycho Pigs and Turbo Thwacking. And with kick fighting, surfing, babe saving, how can you go wrong? Your kid's a freak for Battletoads and these other games from Trade West, Nintendo Entertainment, or Game Boy systems required.
But just like with the Spectrum in 1984, the time to move on from the NES had come. Only this time, it wasn't Rare moving on. It was Nintendo who was moving forward to the 16-bit era with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Rare found themselves unprepared for the transition. With their backs against the wall, the Stamper Brothers and Rare seemingly rediscovered their inspiration. Rare drastically reduced the release schedule to just a handful of Battletoads games and invested a significant amount of their NES profits into Silicon Graphics workstations. Nintendo themselves were in discussions with Silicon Graphics Inc. to help develop what would later become the Nintendo 64. SGI licenses were so expensive that failing to turn their investment into a profit could very well have been enough to break the company. But that didn't matter. Rare was ready to innovate again, and this time, they would do it in a whole new dimension. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of my look at the history of Rare. Please be sure to come back for part 2 next week, and if you like this video and want to see more like it, why not subscribe?